The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Irwin rode into Great Bend, Kansas. A man whose eyes reflected nothing but emptiness, and whose soul had been hardened by a world that had never shown him mercy. The year was 1876, and the West was as wild as the stories told in saloons across the frontier. His horse, a sturdy palomino named Dust, trudged wearily down the main street, hooves kicking up dirt that settled on Liam's worn leather chaps and faded denim. 3 days without sleep had left dark circles under his eyes. 3 years without a place to call home had left something darker inside him. As he dismounted in front of the only hotel in Great Bend, he didn't notice the young woman watching him from the general store across the street. Nora Walton had been working at her father's general store since her 18th birthday 3 years ago. At 21, she had seen countless drifters pass through town, but something about this one caught her attention. Perhaps it was the way he moved cautious, like a wounded animal expecting another blow. Or perhaps it was simply that in a town where most men strutted with bravado, this one seemed to carry his burden with a quiet dignity. "You planning on staring at that stranger all day, or might you help me with these flour sacks?" her father, George Walton, asked, setting down a heavy crate on the counter. Nora blushed, tucking a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear. "Sorry, Pa, it's just—" "He looks like he hasn't eaten in days." George followed his daughter's gaze and frowned. "Another gunslinger by the look of him. That's trouble we don't need, Nora." "We don't know that," she protested, but her father had already disappeared into the back room. Across the street, Liam handed the stable boy a coin to care for Dust and entered the hotel. The lobby was sparsely furnished but clean, with a pot-bellied stove in one corner and a desk where a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose was studying a ledger. "Need a room," Liam said, his voice raspy from disuse. The clerk looked up, taking in Liam's trail-worn appearance and the revolver holstered at his hip. 50 cents a night, in advance." Liam reached into his vest pocket and placed 2 silver coins on the desk. 4 nights. The clerk slid a key across the polished wood. "Room 3, top of the stairs. No smoking, no women, no trouble." Liam nodded once, picked up his saddlebags and headed upstairs. The room was small but offered a bed that wasn't the hard ground and a window that overlooked the main street. He placed his few belongings on the dresser and sat heavily on the edge of the mattress, removing his hat to reveal dark hair in need of a trim. He ran his fingers through it, exhaling slowly as the tension of the trail began to seep from his shoulders. The sound of laughter from the street below drew him to the window. A group of children ran past, chasing a hoop with sticks. Liam watched them, his expression unreadable, before pulling the curtains closed. Nora finished her duties at the store as the sun dipped below the horizon. Her father had left earlier to attend a town meeting, leaving her to lock up. As she turned the key in the door, she glanced up at the hotel, noticing a silhouette in one of the second-floor windows before it disappeared behind drawn curtains. The next morning, Liam awoke to sunlight filtering through threadbare curtains. He dressed quickly, strapping on his gun belt more from habit than necessity. Great Bend seemed peaceful enough, but he'd learned early that peace was often an illusion. The hotel offered a simple breakfast of bacon, eggs, and coffee for its guests. Liam ate alone, seated at a corner table with his back to the wall. When he finished, he headed to the general store to restock his supplies. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. Nora looked up from arranging a display of canned peaches and felt her breath catch slightly. In the clear light of day, she could see the newcomer better. Tall and lean, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a face that might have been handsome if not for the hard set of his jaw and the scar that ran along his left cheekbone. "Good morning," she said, summoning her most professional smile. "Can I help you find something?" Liam's gaze flicked to her briefly. "Coffee, tobacco, ammunition for a Colt .45. Coffee and tobacco are on the shelf behind you," Nora replied. "For the ammunition, I'll need to get my father." She moved toward the back room but stopped when the stranger spoke again. "Also need some jerky." "Whatever's cheapest." Nora turned back. "We have fresh bread too, and some cheese that came in yesterday from the Mitchell farm. It would be a shame to live on jerky if you don't have to." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, at her unsolicited suggestion. "Just the jerky." Nora nodded and went to fetch her father for the ammunition. When she returned with George, the stranger was examining a shelf of books in the corner, an unexpected addition to their inventory that had been Nora's idea. "You need bullets?" George asked, his tone cooler than usual. Liam turned. "Yes, sir. For protection or something else, protection." Liam met the older man's gaze steadily. "I'm not looking for trouble." George studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We've got what you need. Nora, handle the rest of his order while I get the ammunition." As her father disappeared into the storeroom, Nora gathered the coffee and tobacco. "Are you staying in Great Bend long, Mr. Irwin? Liam Irwin?" He shifted uncomfortably at the personal question. "Just passing through." "I'm Nora Walton." She wrapped his purchases in brown paper. "Great Bend is a nice place to stay a while. Not as exciting as some towns, but peaceful. Good people." Liam said nothing, but his eyes scanned the store, taking in details as if cataloging potential threats or escape routes, a habit that spoke of a life spent in vigilance. George returned with a small box of ammunition. "That'll be $2.35 total." Liam counted out the money and gathered his purchases. As he turned to leave, Nora impulsively added a small paper bag to his bundle. "Fresh cookies," she explained when he looked at her questioningly. "On the house. Welcome to Great Bend." The gesture seemed to confuse him more than please him. With a mumbled thanks, he left the store, the bell jingling in his wake. "That was foolish," George said after the door closed. "It was just cookies, Pa." It was an invitation to a man who likely doesn't understand kindness without expecting something in return. He sighed at his daughter's crestfallen expression. "Nora, I know you see good in everyone, but some people aren't looking to be saved." "Maybe they should be saved anyway," she replied softly. Later that afternoon, Liam sat on a bench outside the barber shop, watching the town go about its business. He'd gotten a haircut and shave, and the barber had been talkative enough to provide him with information about Great Bend. Established in 1872, the town had grown quickly due to its position on the Santa Fe Trail. The railroad had brought prosperity, and while it wasn't immune to the typical frontier vices, it had managed to avoid the lawlessness that plagued other boomtowns. As he observed the street, he noticed Nora Walton delivering packages to various businesses. She moved with a purpose, smiling and exchanging pleasantries with everyone she encountered. When she spotted him, she waved, and Liam found himself lifting his hand in response before he'd consciously decided to do so. She approached, carrying her nearly empty delivery basket. "Mr. Irwin, you clean up nice." Her smile was warm and genuine. "Miss Walton." He stood, an ingrained courtesy that seemed at odds with his otherwise rough demeanor. "How are you finding our town?" "Quiet," he replied. "That's good. We're having a social at the church tomorrow evening. Music, food, dancing. Everyone's welcome." She hesitated, then added, "Even strangers just passing through." Liam tensed slightly. "I'm not much for socials." "That's a shame. Mrs. Henderson makes the best apple pie this side of the Mississippi." Nora shifted her basket to her other arm. "And sometimes it's nice to remember there are good things in the world, don't you think?" Before he could respond, a commotion erupted from the saloon across the street. Two men burst through the batwing doors, grappling with each other. One shoved the other hard, sending him sprawling into the street. The fallen man scrambled to his feet, hand reaching for his gun. Liam moved instantly, stepping in front of Nora as his hand hovered near his own weapon. The tension in his body was palpable as he watched the confrontation unfold. Sheriff Daniel Riley emerged from his office, moving swiftly to intercept the men before the situation escalated further. "That's enough." His authoritative voice boomed across the street. "Thompson, Gideon, cool your heads or spend the night in my jail." The men glared at each other but backed down. Liam's posture relaxed slightly, but he didn't move from his protective stance until the sheriff had herded both men back into the saloon, presumably to settle their differences peacefully. "Thank you," Nora said quietly, realizing he'd positioned himself to shield her. "Though I doubt they would have started shooting in broad daylight. People do foolish things when they're angry enough," Liam replied, his voice distant, as if speaking from experience. Nora studied his face, noticing how his eyes remained fixed on the saloon doors, alert for any further threat. "You've seen a lot of foolish things, haven't you?" His gaze finally shifted to her. "More than I care to remember." "Well," she said brightly, trying to dispel the darkness that had settled around him, "I should finish my deliveries. Think about the social, it might surprise you." She started to walk away, then turned back. "How were the cookies?" For the first time, a hint of softness crossed his features. "Good, thank you." Nora smiled and continued on her way, leaving Liam to watch her disappear around a corner. He sat back down on the bench, pulling out one of the cookies he'd saved. It was simple sugar and cinnamon, but he couldn't remember the last time someone had given him something without expecting payment or favor in return. That evening, Liam ate dinner at the small restaurant next to the hotel. The food was plain but plentiful, and he found himself hungrier than he'd been in days. As he was finishing his meal, Sheriff Riley entered and, after a moment's consideration, approached Liam's table. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, though he was already pulling out a chair. Liam gestured to the empty seat with his fork. "Free country." The sheriff settled in, signaling the waitress for coffee. "Daniel Riley, I'm the law around here." Liam Irwin, passing through or looking to stay, Liam shrugged. "Haven't decided." Riley studied him with experienced eyes. "I make it a point to know who's in my town, especially men who carry their gun like they know how to use it. I keep to myself." "I noticed that. Also noticed how you reacted to the trouble outside the saloon today. Quick reflexes, good instincts." Riley paused as the waitress delivered his coffee. "You've worn a badge before." It wasn't a question, but Liam answered anyway. "Once, long time ago." "Where?" "Colorado territory. Doesn't matter now." Riley nodded slowly. "Great Bend's a good town. We like to keep it that way." "Whatever your past is, it stays there as long as you don't bring trouble here. Understood?" Liam met the sheriff's gaze. "Perfectly." "Good." Riley took a sip of his coffee. "Now, about why I really came over. Got word this morning that the Shelton gang might be headed this way. They've hit 3 banks in the last month. I could use another experienced gun if they show up. I'm not looking for work. Not asking you to join the force. Just saying that if trouble finds us, an extra hand would be appreciated." Riley stood, placing a coin on the table for his coffee. "Enjoy your stay in Great Bend, Mr. Irwin, however long it lasts." After the sheriff left, Liam finished his meal in thoughtful silence. He'd ridden into town intending to rest for a few days before moving on, as he always did. He never stayed anywhere long enough to form attachments or draw attention. Yet here he was, already known to the sheriff, and being invited to socials by pretty storekeepers with kind eyes. He should leave now, he thought. Pack his things and ride out at first light. But the prospect of another endless journey with no destination left him weary in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. When he returned to his hotel room, he stood at the window for a long time, watching as Great Bend settled into evening routines. Lamps were lit in windows, families gathered for supper, and the saloon across the street grew rowdier as the night progressed. Normal life unfolding before him, a life he'd never known. The next day dawned bright and clear. Liam woke early, as was his habit, and spent the morning walking the perimeter of town, assessing it with the trained eye of a former lawman. Great Bend was larger than it appeared at first glance, with several streets radiating from the main thoroughfare. The bank was a solid brick building with barred windows, the livery stable was well maintained, and the schoolhouse stood proudly at the north end of town. As he rounded the corner back onto Main Street, he nearly collided with Nora, who was carrying a large basket of laundry. "Oh!" she exclaimed, stumbling slightly. Liam's hand shot out to steady her, grasping her elbow. "Mr. Irwin, good morning. Miss Walton." He released her arm quickly. "Let me help you with that." Before she could protest, he took the heavy basket from her. "Thank you. I'm just taking these linens to Mrs. Parker. She's been ill, and my mother offered to wash her bedding." They walked side by side down the boardwalk. Liam noticed several townsfolk watching them with curious expressions, and he fought the urge to duck his head or quicken his pace. "Have you decided about the social tonight?" Nora asked. "I don't think so," he replied. "Not really my kind of gathering." Nora glanced at him. "What is your kind of gathering, then?" The question caught him off guard. I usually keep to myself. Always." There was no judgment in her tone, just genuine curiosity. For a long time now. They reached a modest house with lace curtains in the windows. Nora led him up the steps and knocked on the door. An elderly woman answered, her face lighting up at the sight of Nora. "Oh, my dear, you're an angel," she said, opening the door wider. "And who's this handsome gentleman?" "Mrs. Parker, this is Mr. Liam Irwin. He's staying in town for a while and kindly offered to carry your laundry." Liam nodded awkwardly, unaccustomed to such introductions. "Well, bring it in, Mrs. Parker urged. "I've just made tea." To Liam's discomfort, he found himself ushered into a cozy sitting room while Mrs. Parker fussed over the fresh linens. Nora seemed perfectly at ease, accepting a cup of tea and inquiring about the older woman's health. "Much better now, thanks to your mother's tonic," Mrs. Parker replied. She turned to Liam. "Mrs. Walton has a gift with herbal remedies. Saved half the town during last winter's influenza outbreak." Liam shifted in his chair, the delicate teacup looking absurdly small in his weathered hands. "That's so?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Parker continued. "The Walton women are treasures. George is the luckiest man in Kansas, having both his wife and daughter with such caring hearts." She patted Nora's hand affectionately. "This one visits me every week, rain or shine, just to read to me since my eyes aren't what they used to be." Nora blushed. "It's nothing, really. I enjoy the stories as much as you do." Liam watched her, finding it difficult to reconcile her gentle nature with his own hardened view of the world. In his experience, kindness always came with conditions. Yet here was evidence to the contrary sitting across from him, radiating sincerity. After they left Mrs. Parker's house, Liam and Nora walked back toward the center of town. The morning had warmed considerably, and the streets were busier now. "Thank you for coming in," Nora said. "Mrs. Parker doesn't get many visitors besides me and my mother. She seems nice." The word felt foreign on his tongue. "She is. She lost her husband and son in the war, been alone ever since." Nora looked up at him. "Everyone has a story, Mr. Irwin. Some are just harder to read than others." He felt her gaze on him but kept his eyes fixed ahead. "Some stories aren't worth reading." "I disagree," she said softly. "Every story matters, especially the difficult ones." They reached the general store and Nora paused at the entrance. "The social starts at 7, just in case you change your mind." With a final smile, she disappeared inside. Liam stood there for a moment, feeling oddly untethered. He'd planned to spend the day checking his gear and planning his route out of town, but now he found himself without direction. Eventually, he made his way to the livery stable to check on Dust. The stable boy, a freckle-faced youth of about 16, was brushing down Liam's horse when he entered. "Morning, mister. Your horse is doing fine. Got a sweet temperament for such a big animal." Liam approached Dust, running a hand along the horse's neck. "He's been with me a long time. You two been all over, I bet," the boy said enthusiastically. "I'm saving up for my own horse. Pa says when I have enough I can pick one out myself. Good goal to have." Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out a sugar cube he'd taken from the hotel dining room. Dust accepted it eagerly. "You coming to the social tonight?" the boy asked. "Whole town'll be there. Even old Jenkins, and he hates people." Liam's mouth quirked slightly at the boy's candor. "Not sure yet. You should. Miss Nora's been organizing it for weeks. She says it's to celebrate the harvest, but everyone knows it's really to cheer up Mrs. Miller after she lost her baby last month." The boy continued brushing Dust's flank. "Miss Nora's always doing stuff like that. Making people feel better." Liam absorbed this information silently. He'd known women like Nora before, or thought he had. They usually turned out to be using their charm to manipulate or deceive. But the more he learned about Nora Walton, the more genuine she seemed. "What's your name, kid?" he asked. "Thomas Bailey, sir. Everyone calls me Tom." "Well, Tom, you're doing a good job with Dust. He's particular about who handles him." The boy beamed at the compliment. "Thank you, sir. I aim to be the best horseman in Kansas someday." Liam spent another hour at the stable, checking Dust's shoes and saddle, and listening to Tom's enthusiastic chatter about horses and town gossip. The boy seemed to know everything about everyone in Great Bend, and Liam found himself learning more about the town than he had intended. As the day wore on, Liam felt an unusual restlessness. He cleaned his gun, reorganized his saddlebags, and even purchased a new shirt from the mercantile, all tasks that could be justified as preparation for the trail, but none that explained why he found himself standing outside the church at 7 o'clock that evening. The sound of music and laughter spilled from the open doors. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting a warm glow over the churchyard where tables had been set up with food and drink. Children ran between the adults, playing tag and shrieking with delight. It was a scene of community and connection that made Liam feel like an intruder. He was about to turn away when Nora emerged from the church, carrying a tray of cups. She spotted him immediately, her face lighting up with a smile that made him freeze in place. "You came," she exclaimed, handing the tray to a nearby woman before approaching him. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was styled more elaborately than usual, with small flowers woven into the braids. "Just passing by," he lied. "Well, now that you're here, you might as well stay for some food." She took his arm with a confidence that surprised him, leading him toward the tables. "Mrs. Henderson's apple pie is still warm." Before he knew it, Liam found himself with a plate of food, seated at a table with Nora and her parents. George Walton regarded him with thinly veiled suspicion, but Margaret Walton was as welcoming as her daughter. "So, Mr. Irwin, Nora tells me you're new to Great Bend," Margaret said, passing him a basket of rolls. "What brings you to our little town?" "Just traveling," he replied. "Needed a place to rest for a few days." "And where are you headed?" George asked. Liam took a bite of food to buy time. "Not sure yet. Maybe California." "That's quite a journey," Margaret observed. "Any particular reason?" He shrugged. "Heard there are opportunities there." "There are opportunities everywhere," George said, "for men willing to put down roots and work hard." "George," Margaret chided gently. "Not everyone is meant to stay in one place. Some souls need to wander." "Until they find the right place to call home," Nora added, her gaze meeting Liam's briefly. The conversation shifted to town matters, and Liam was content to listen, offering only occasional comments when directly addressed. It was strange, sitting among a family, sharing a meal as if he belonged there. Strange, but not unpleasant. After dinner, the tables were cleared to make room for dancing. A small band consisting of a fiddle player, a guitarist, and a man with a harmonica struck up a lively tune, and couples began to form circles for a reel. "You dance, Mr. Irwin?" Nora asked as they watched the dancers. "Not in a long time." "It's easy to remember," she said, standing and offering her hand. "Come on." Liam hesitated. "I don't think just one dance," she insisted. "Then I promise to stop bothering you about joining in." Perhaps it was the unusually relaxed atmosphere, or perhaps it was simply the fact that no one had looked at him with such hopeful expectation in years, but Liam found himself standing and taking her hand. Her fingers felt small and warm in his calloused palm. The dance was simpler than he remembered, or maybe Nora was just a good partner. She guided him through the steps with subtle pressure and encouraging smiles, never drawing attention to his initial stiffness or occasional missteps. By the end of the song, he had relaxed enough to actually enjoy the movement and music. As the final notes faded, they stood facing each other, slightly breathless. Nora's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with pleasure. "See, not so terrible, was it?" "No," he admitted. "Not terrible at all." The band began a slower tune, and couples around them moved closer together. Nora looked at him expectantly, but Liam stepped back. "I should go. Thank you for the dance, Miss Walton." Disappointment flickered across her face but was quickly replaced with understanding. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Irwin. It meant a lot." He nodded awkwardly and turned to leave, aware of several curious gazes following him. As he walked back to the hotel, the music growing fainter behind him, Liam felt a strange mixture of relief and regret. The social had been exactly what he'd feared, a reminder of a life he'd convinced himself he didn't want, couldn't have. Yet as he lay in his hotel room that night, listening to the distant sounds of the celebration continuing without him, he couldn't shake the memory of Nora's hand in his, or the way her eyes had lit up when she'd spotted him outside the church. 3 days later, Liam still hadn't left Great Bend. He told himself it was because he needed more rest, or because the weather wasn't ideal for travel, but the truth was more complicated. For the first time in years, he felt a reluctance to move on, a tentative connection to a place and its people. He'd established a routine of sorts. Breakfast at the hotel, then a walk around town. Sometimes he'd sit on the bench outside the barber shop and watch the street life. Other times he'd visit Dust at the livery stable, where Tom was always eager to chat. And invariably, his path would take him past the general store, where he'd find some small item he supposedly needed, just for the chance to exchange a few words with Nora. On this particular morning, he entered the store to find it unusually busy. A wagon train was passing through, and travelers crowded the aisles, stocking up on supplies. Liam hung back, content to wait until the rush subsided. "Mr. Irwin," Nora called when she spotted him. "If you're not in a hurry, I could use some help." Before he could respond, she was leading him to the back of the store where several heavy crates needed to be moved. Pa's making a delivery to the Mitchell's farm, and I'm swamped with customers. Of course, Liam said, rolling up his sleeves. Where do you want these? For the next hour, he worked alongside Nora, moving stock, fetching items from high shelves, and even assisting customers when she was occupied. It was honest work, straightforward in a way that felt satisfying. When the last of the wagon train travelers left, Nora collapsed onto a stool behind the counter with a sigh. Thank you. I don't know how I would have managed alone. Liam leaned against the counter, surprising himself with how comfortable he felt. Your father usually leaves you to handle the store alone, not when we're expecting a rush, but the wagon train arrived a day early. She brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. Pa should be back by supper time. You did well. Kept your head when that man tried to haggle over the already fair price of coffee. Nora laughed. Mr. Peterson tries that everywhere he goes. He's actually quite nice once you get to know him. You seem to think that about most people, because it's usually true. She studied him for a moment, even the ones who try very hard to seem otherwise. Liam shifted under her perceptive gaze. Not everyone deserves your good opinion, Miss Walton. Perhaps not. But I'd rather offer it freely and occasionally be disappointed than withhold it and miss connecting with good people. She stood, straightening her apron. Have you had lunch? I was about to close for a bit and eat. I don't want to impose. It's not an imposition when it's an invitation, she said. Besides, you earned a meal with all your help. Before he could protest further, she flipped the sign on the door to closed and led him through the back of the store to a small apartment where the Walton family lived. The kitchen was cozy and welcoming, with herbs hanging from the ceiling and a table set by a window that overlooked a small garden. Nora moved efficiently around the space, assembling a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold ham. It's nothing fancy, she apologized, but filling. It looks good, Liam said honestly. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a meal in someone's home rather than a restaurant or campfire. As they ate, Nora asked about his travels, and to his own surprise, Liam found himself sharing stories from the trail carefully edited to omit the darker aspects of his life. She listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed a curiosity about the world beyond Great Bend. Have you ever seen the ocean? She asked wistfully. Once. The Pacific when I was younger. It's humbling, makes a man feel small in a good way. I'd love to see it someday. She rested her chin on her hand. I've never been farther east than Topeka or farther west than Dodge City. You could go, Liam said. You seem capable enough to manage on your own. Nora smiled. Maybe someday. But for now, my place is here. Pa needs help with the store, and Ma's health isn't what it used to be. She hesitated, then added, besides, there's something to be said for having roots, knowing where you belong. Liam thought about that as they finished their meal. Roots had always seemed like anchors to him, things that held you down, kept you trapped. But the way Nora described them made them sound like sources of strength instead. After lunch, they returned to the store, and Liam found himself staying for the remainder of the afternoon, helping customers and organizing stock. The work was unfamiliar but straightforward, and there was satisfaction in seeing the shelves neatly arranged, the floor swept clean. George Walton returned as the sun was setting, his eyebrows rising in surprise at finding Liam behind the counter, measuring coffee beans for Mrs. Jenkins. Mr. Irwin has been a godsend, Pa, Nora explained. The wagon train came through and we were swamped. George studied Liam for a long moment, then nodded. Appreciate the help. Least I could do, Liam replied, finishing with the coffee and handing the package to Mrs. Jenkins. After the elderly woman left, George turned to his daughter. "Your mother's expecting us for supper soon. You should close up." "Yes, Pa." She began counting the day's receipts while George examined the newly organized shelves. "You've done this before," he observed to Liam. "Worked in a store." "My father owned a general store, long time ago." The admission slipped out before Liam could consider it, a piece of his past he rarely acknowledged. George's expression softened slightly. "Family business, then, it was." Liam's tone made it clear that the subject was closed. Nora looked up from her counting. "Mr. Irwin, would you like to join us for supper? Ma always makes plenty." Before Liam could respond, George cut in. "Nora, I'm sure Mr. Irwin has his own plans for the evening." Liam nodded, recognizing the dismissal. "Thank you for the offer, Miss Walton, but your father's right. I should be going." He headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "Thank you for lunch." Outside, the evening air had cooled, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Liam walked slowly toward the hotel, his thoughts jumbled. The day had awakened memories he'd long suppressed of his father's store in a small Colorado town, of helping customers and stocking shelves, of a life that had been simple and secure until it wasn't. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice Sheriff Riley approaching until the man was right beside him. "Irwin," Riley greeted him. "Got a minute?" Liam nodded, falling into step with the sheriff. "Heard you spent the day helping out at Walton's store," Riley said. "Word travels fast." "Small town." Riley led them toward his office. "Also heard you're handy with organization and know your way around merchandise." "What are you getting at, Sheriff?" Riley opened the door to his office and gestured Liam inside. "Got word this morning. Shelton gang hit a bank in Ellsworth 2 days ago. Killed the teller and a customer who tried to stop them." He moved to his desk and unfolded a telegram. "They were spotted heading south. Could be passing near Great Bend in the next few days." Liam's body tensed at the news. "You think they'll hit the bank here?" "It's possible. I've warned the bank manager to expect them, but I only have 2 deputies and one's laid up with a broken leg." Riley studied Liam intently. "I could use a man with experience. I told you I'm not looking for a badge. Not offering one. Just asking for help protecting this town." Riley leaned against his desk. "You've been here almost a week now. Longest any drifter usually stays unless they're putting down roots." "Just resting," Liam muttered. "Sure." Riley didn't sound convinced. "Look, I'm not asking you to commit to anything beyond helping keep an eye out for Shelton and his boys. You've been walking the town every day anyway. Might as well do it with purpose." Liam considered the request. Getting involved went against every instinct he'd developed over the years of keeping to himself, of avoiding attachments and responsibilities. But the thought of the Shelton gang bringing violence to Great Bend to the people he'd begun to know stirred something protective in him. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Keep your eyes open. Help me establish a watch rotation for the bank, and if trouble comes—" Riley trailed off. "If trouble comes, you want me to fight," Liam finished for him. "Yes." Liam was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. He could leave now, continue his journey west, and avoid whatever was coming to Great Bend. It would be the sensible choice, the one consistent with the life he'd been leading. But then he thought of Nora's kind smile, of Tom's enthusiasm at the livery stable, of Mrs. Parker with her tea and lace curtains, people who had shown him small kindnesses without asking for anything in return. "All right," he finally said. "I'll help, but once the threat is past, I'm moving on." Relief washed over Riley's face. "That's all I'm asking, thank you." They spent the next hour discussing strategy. The bank was the most likely target, but the general store and the express office also kept cash on hand. Riley had already spoken with the bank manager about extra security measures, and they agreed to establish a rotating watch, with Liam taking the first shift the following morning. As Liam left the sheriff's office, the first raindrops began to fall. He quickened his pace, reaching the hotel just as the sky opened up in earnest. From the lobby window, he watched the rain transform Great Bend's Main Street into a river of mud, washing away the day's dust and leaving everything looking renewed. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the rain having passed in the night. Liam positioned himself on a bench across from the bank, hat pulled low over his eyes, seemingly dozing but acutely aware of every person who passed by. Sheriff Riley had provided him with descriptions of the Shelton gang. 4 men, led by Frank Shelton, a former Confederate soldier with a reputation for cold-blooded efficiency. The morning passed uneventfully. At noon, Deputy Warren Miller relieved him, and Liam made his way to the general store. He'd been deliberately avoiding Nora since leaving abruptly the previous evening, but now found himself drawn back, concerned about the store's vulnerability if the gang decided it was an easier target than the bank. The bell jingled as he entered, and Nora looked up from helping a customer, her face brightening when she saw him. She finished wrapping the customer's purchase before approaching him. "Mr. Irwin, I wondered if we'd see you today." "Just checking in," he said, keeping his voice casual. "Everything quiet here?" She tilted her head slightly. "Yes, though we're never very exciting. Is something wrong?" Liam hesitated, unsure how much the sheriff had shared with the townspeople. "Just being cautious." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "This is about those bank robbers, isn't it?" Sheriff Riley warned Pa yesterday to be careful with the cash box. "Smart precaution," Liam said. "Where is your father?" "Making deliveries again. Won't be back until late." She lowered her voice. "He took most of our cash to deposit at the bank this morning just to be safe." Liam frowned. The store was vulnerable with George gone, especially if Nora was alone. "Anyone else working today?" "Just me." "Why?" Before he could respond, the bell over the door jingled again. A tall man in a dusty coat entered, followed by a shorter, wiry companion. Something about their demeanor instantly put Liam on alert. The way they surveyed the store, the calculated casualness of their movements. "Afternoon, madam," the taller man said, touching the brim of his hat. "Fine establishment you have here." "Thank you," Nora replied with professional courtesy. "Can I help you find something?" "Just passing through, looking to stock up on supplies." The man's gaze flicked to Liam, then back to Nora. "You the owner?" "My father owns the store. I'm just minding it while he's out." The shorter man had drifted toward the back, ostensibly examining merchandise but effectively positioning himself between Nora and the rear exit. Liam recognized the tactic he'd seen it used in robberies before. "Miss Walton," Liam said calmly, "I just remembered your father asked me to help move those crates in the storeroom. Why don't you show me which ones?" Confusion crossed her face briefly before she caught his meaningful look. "Of course. This way, Mr. Irwin." To the customers, she added, "Please feel free to browse. I'll be right back." As soon as they were in the storeroom, Liam closed the door and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Those men aren't here to shop. I think they might be part of the Shelton gang." Nora's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "Not certain, but they're trouble either way." "Is there another way out of here?" She nodded. "There's a back door that leads to the alley and from there to our living quarters." "Good. I want you to go now. Get to the sheriff's office and tell Riley we might have members of the gang in town." "What about you?" "I'll stay and make sure they don't follow you." He reached for his gun, checking that it was loaded. Nora's expression hardened with determination. "This is our store, Mr. Irwin. I'm not running away while strangers rob it." "This isn't open for debate," Liam said firmly. "These men are dangerous. They've already killed people. All the more reason not to leave you alone with them." She glanced around the storeroom and picked up a small derringer from a shelf. "Pa keeps this for emergencies." Liam stared at her in disbelief. "Put that down. You're not staying." "Yes, I am." Her chin lifted stubbornly. "We can both go for the sheriff, or we can both stay, but I'm not leaving you here alone." A sound from the store, the cash register being opened, interrupted their argument. Liam cursed under his breath. "Fine. Stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run." "Understood." Nora nodded, tucking the derringer into her pocket. Liam opened the storeroom door slowly. The taller man was behind the counter, rifling through the cash drawer while his companion stood watch at the window. "Find much?" Liam asked casually, his hand resting on his holstered gun. Both men whirled around. The tall one's hand moved toward his own weapon, but he froze when he saw Liam's stance. "Just looking for change," he said with a forced smile. "Wanted to buy some tobacco." "Tobacco's on the shelf," Liam replied. "Cash drawers not self-service in this establishment." The shorter man had edged closer to the door. "We don't want trouble, mister." "Then put back what you've taken and leave town," Liam said evenly. "Sheriff Riley doesn't take kindly to thieves." At the mention of the sheriff, the men exchanged glances. "We're just passing through," the tall one said, slowly closing the cash drawer. "No need to involve the law." "Too late for that," came Sheriff Riley's voice from the doorway. He stood with his gun drawn, Deputy Miller beside him. "Hands where I can see them, gentlemen." The tension in the room was palpable as the would-be robbers weighed their options. Finally, the tall one raised his hands slowly. His companion followed suit a moment later. "Check them for weapons, Miller," Riley ordered. As the deputy disarmed the men, the sheriff looked at Liam. "Tom from the livery came running to tell me he'd seen two strangers matching the Shelton gang's description enter the store. You two all right?" "We're fine," Liam answered, his eyes still on the robbers. "They didn't get a chance to do much damage." "These aren't Shelton's men," Riley said after studying the prisoners. "But I recognize this one from wanted posters. Joe Deakins, wanted for robbery in Missouri." The tall man Deakins scowled but didn't deny it. "Miss Walton, are you all right?" Riley asked. Nora had emerged from behind Liam, her face pale but composed. "Yes, Sheriff, thanks to Mr. Irwin." "Get these two to the jail, Miller," Riley instructed. "I'll be along shortly." As the deputy led the men away, Riley turned back to Liam. "Good work. Though I'm not sure confronting armed robbers alone was the wisest move." "Wasn't planning to," Liam replied, glancing at Nora. "Someone refused to leave." Riley's eyebrows rose. "Is that so, Miss Walton?" "I couldn't just abandon the store," she said defensively. "Or Mr. Irwin." The sheriff shook his head, but there was a hint of admiration in his expression. "You Walton women and your stubbornness. Well, no harm done this time, but let's not make a habit of heroics." He tipped his hat to Nora. "I'll send Miller back to keep an eye on the store until your father returns." After Riley left, a heavy silence fell between Liam and Nora. The aftermath of danger left them both on edge, adrenaline still coursing through their systems. "You should have run when I told you to," Liam finally said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "And you should thank me for not leaving you outnumbered," she countered, though her hands trembled slightly as she straightened items on the counter. Liam stepped closer, taking the tin she was holding from her shaking fingers. "You could have been hurt, or worse." "So could you?" She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I couldn't bear that." The raw honesty in her voice struck him like a physical blow. For years, he'd convinced himself that no one would care if he lived or died, that his existence left no mark on the world. Yet here was this woman, nearly in tears at the thought of him coming to harm. "Nora," he said, using her first name for the first time, I'm not worth your tears. That's where you're wrong, Liam Irwin. She reached up and gently touched his face, her fingers warm against his cheek. Every person is worth caring about, especially those who have forgotten how to care for themselves. Something broke inside him, then a wall he'd built so carefully, brick by brick, year after year. He caught her hand in his, holding it against his face for a moment before lowering it. "I should go," he said roughly. "Deputy Miller will be here soon." Nora nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "Yes," he promised, surprising himself with how easily the word came. "Tomorrow." That night, Liam sat on the edge of his hotel bed, cleaning his gun with methodical precision while his mind raced. The confrontation at the store had shaken him more than he cared to admit, not because of the danger to himself, but because of what might have happened to Nora. The thought of her being hurt, of losing her brightness and warmth from the world, was unbearable in a way that left him deeply unsettled. He'd spent years cultivating detachment, convincing himself that connections only led to pain. Yet in less than 2 weeks, this small Kansas town and its people, particularly one stubborn storekeeper, had begun to matter to him. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He set the gun aside and opened the door to find Sheriff Riley. "Evening, Irwin," Riley said. "May I come in?" Liam stepped back, allowing the sheriff to enter. "Problem with the prisoners?" "No, they're secure. Wired the sheriff in Missouri about them. He'll be sending someone to collect them next week." Riley removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "That's not why I'm here, though." "What is it, then?" "Got another telegram. Shelton and his remaining men robbed a bank in Hayes yesterday. 2 more people dead." Riley's expression was grim. "They're definitely headed this way." Liam absorbed this news silently. "When do you expect them?" "Day after tomorrow, if they keep to their pattern." Riley sat heavily in the room's only chair. "I've sent for help from the county marshal, but he's tied up with a land dispute and can't spare any men for at least 3 days. So it's just you, 1 deputy, and me against 4 experienced killers." "That's the size of it," Riley confirmed. "Unless you've changed your mind about staying." Liam picked up his gun, resuming his cleaning. "I gave my word I'd help with Shelton. That hasn't changed." Relief crossed Riley's face. "Appreciate that." He hesitated, then added, "The Waltons think highly of you, you know, especially Nora." Liam's hand stilled momentarily. "They're good people." "They are. George Walton's one of the finest men I know, though he can be overprotective of his daughter." Riley stood, replacing his hat. "Just thought you should know that if you're planning to stick around after this Shelton business, you'd be welcome. Great Bend could use a man with your skills." "I'm not looking to settle," Liam said automatically. "So you've said." Riley headed for the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll work on a plan for when Shelton arrives." After the sheriff left, Liam finished cleaning his gun and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, the prospect of moving on didn't fill him with the usual sense of freedom. Instead, he felt a heaviness in his chest, a reluctance that was new and troubling. He thought of Nora's face when she'd touched his cheek, the warmth in her eyes that seemed to see past his carefully constructed barriers to the man he'd once been, or perhaps the man he could still become. It was a dangerous thought, one that threatened the careful detachment he'd maintained for so long. But as sleep finally claimed him, it wasn't the open road that filled his dreams, but a small store in a Kansas town, and a woman with kind eyes and a determined spirit. The next day was spent preparing for Shelton's potential arrival. Liam joined Sheriff Riley and Deputy Miller in fortifying the bank, positioning lookouts at key points around town, and creating a response plan. Several townsmen volunteered to help, including George Walton, who proved to be surprisingly knowledgeable about defensive strategies. "Served in the war," he explained when Liam commented on his tactical suggestions. "Union cavalry. Saw enough fighting to last a lifetime." By late afternoon, they had done all they could to prepare. Riley called a final meeting at his office to review the plan. "We'll have men watching all approaches to town," he said, indicating points on a map spread across his desk. "At the first sign of Shelton and his gang, the alarm will sound. Civilians should take shelter immediately. Miller, you'll coordinate the east side defenses. Walton, you'll handle the volunteers at the north end. Irwin and I will cover the bank directly." George Walton cleared his throat. "What about the store and our home?" "I've assigned 2 men to that area," Riley assured him. "Your family will be protected." "I want Nora and Margaret to stay at the Hendersons' farm until this is over," George said. "It's well outside town and safer." Riley nodded. "Good idea. When can they leave?" "Tonight." "I've already spoken with Henderson. He's sending a wagon at sundown." Liam felt a mixture of relief and disappointment at this news. Relief that Nora would be safely away from danger, but disappointment that he wouldn't see her before the confrontation with Shelton. If things went badly, he might never see her again. As the meeting concluded and the men dispersed to their assigned positions, Liam found himself walking alongside George back toward the store. "Mr. Walton," he began awkwardly, "your daughter, she's a remarkable woman." George gave him a measured look. "She takes after her mother that way. I just wanted to say, I respect her greatly, and your family." Liam struggled to articulate feelings he barely understood himself. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'll do everything I can to protect this town." George stopped walking, turning to face Liam directly. "Mr. Irwin, I may not know much about your past, but I've watched you these past 2 weeks. You're a man of principle, despite whatever burdens you carry." He extended his hand. "I'm proud to stand with you tomorrow." Liam shook the offered hand, humbled by the unexpected acceptance. "Thank you, sir." They continued walking in companionable silence until they reached the store. As they approached, Liam saw Nora through the window, packing a small valise, her expression troubled. When they entered, she looked up, relief washing over her face at the sight of her father, followed by a more complex emotion when she saw Liam. "Everything's arranged," George told her. "Henderson's wagon will be here at sundown. Your mother's already packed." Nora nodded, but her eyes remained on Liam. "May I speak with Mr. Irwin alone for a moment, Pa?" George hesitated, then nodded. "I'll check on your mother. 5 minutes." He disappeared into the back of the store. As soon as they were alone, Nora abandoned her packing and moved closer to Liam. "Sheriff Riley told me about Shelton, about how dangerous he is. Riley's a good lawman. We've prepared as best we can. But you could be hurt." Her voice wavered slightly. "Or killed." Liam wished he could offer reassurance, but he wouldn't lie to her. "It's possible. That's why it's good you'll be safely away." "I don't want to go." Her hand reached for his, twining their fingers together. "Not when you're in danger." "Nora," he said softly, "your father needs to know you're safe. We all do. It's the only way we can focus on what needs to be done." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. "Promise me something, if I can. Promise you'll be careful, and—" She hesitated, vulnerability evident in her expression. "Promise you won't leave without saying goodbye." The request caught him off guard. He'd been so certain of his plan to move on after dealing with Shelton, yet now the prospect of leaving filled him with an ache he couldn't ignore. "I promise," he said finally, squeezing her hand. Her eyes searched his face, as if memorizing his features. Then, with a boldness that surprised him, she stood on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "For luck," she whispered. The sound of George returning broke the moment. Nora stepped back, her cheeks flushed, and resumed her packing. Liam nodded to George and took his leave. the warmth of Nora's kiss lingering on his skin long after he'd returned to his post at the bank. Dawn broke clear and cool the next day. Liam had barely slept, spending most of the night on watch at the bank with Sheriff Riley. As the town began to stir, an unnatural quiet settled over Great Bend. Word had spread about the potential danger, and many families had either left town temporarily or were staying indoors. By mid-morning, there was still no sign of the Shelton gang. Riley paced the bank's front room, periodically checking in with his lookouts via messenger. Maybe they changed their route, Deputy Miller suggested hopefully. Decided Great Bend was too much trouble. Possible, Riley acknowledged, but not likely. Shelton's been hitting towns in a straight line south. We're the next logical target. Or they're waiting for us to lower our guard, Liam added, checking his ammunition for the third time that morning. His words proved prophetic when, shortly after noon, a breathless boy ran into the bank. "Sheriff, riders coming from the east, 4 men moving fast," Riley straightened, his expression hardening. "Sound the alarm. Everyone to their positions." The warning bell began to toll, its urgent clanging echoing through the streets of Great Bend. Shopkeepers hurriedly closed their businesses, and civilians sought shelter. Liam positioned himself near a window that offered a clear view of the street, his rifle at the ready. "Here they come," Riley muttered as 4 riders appeared at the far end of the street, slowing their horses to a walk as they approached the center of town. Even from a distance, Liam could identify Frank Shelton. He rode slightly ahead of the others, his posture straight and commanding. A former officer, Riley had said, who'd returned from the war with a talent for violence and no moral compass to restrain it. The riders stopped outside the saloon, surveying the unusually empty street with obvious suspicion. Shelton signaled to one of his men, who dismounted and entered the saloon, presumably to gather information. "They know something's off," Liam observed quietly. Riley nodded. "Question is whether they'll back out or push forward." They got their answer moments later when the gang member emerged from the saloon, spoke briefly to Shelton, and pointed directly at the bank. Shelton's face hardened, and he reached for his rifle. "Get ready," Riley warned, moving to a position near the door. Suddenly, a shot rang out from somewhere down the street, one of the nervous volunteers, firing too soon. The element of surprise lost, chaos erupted. Shelton and his men split up, taking cover behind water troughs and hitching posts. 2 headed for the bank while the others provided covering fire. Liam aimed carefully and fired, hitting one of the approaching men in the shoulder. The outlaw stumbled but kept coming, ducking behind a freight wagon across from the bank. Riley exchanged shots with Shelton himself, neither man finding a clear target. The gunfire intensified as the town's defenders joined the fight from their various positions. "We need to draw them away from the center of town," Liam called to Riley over the noise. "Too many innocent people could get caught in the crossfire." "Got any ideas?" Riley asked, reloading his weapon. Liam thought quickly. "They want the bank's money. Let's make them think they can get it." He explained his plan rapidly, and Riley nodded his agreement. Moments later, Liam burst from the bank's side door, carrying what appeared to be a money bag but was actually filled with paper. He ran toward the livery stable, making himself an obvious target. The ruse worked. 2 of Shelton's men immediately gave chase, firing as they ran. Liam ducked between buildings, leading them away from the main street and toward the edge of town where there would be fewer bystanders. He reached the livery stable and ducked inside, finding Tom hiding behind a stall door, his young face pale with fear. "Stay down," Liam ordered, positioning himself near a window. When the first outlaw appeared in the doorway, Liam fired, hitting him in the chest. The man collapsed without a sound. The second man was more cautious, firing blindly into the stable from outside. Liam waited patiently, conserving his ammunition until he had a clear shot. When the outlaw finally peered around the doorframe, Liam's bullet found its mark. The man fell, wounded but still moving. Liam approached cautiously, kicking the outlaw's gun away before checking the severity of his injury. The bullet had struck him in the upper arm, painful but not immediately life-threatening. "You'll live to hang," Liam told him, using the man's own bandana to bind his wound and prevent him from bleeding out. "Tom," he called to the stable boy, "can you watch him? Keep that rifle trained on him and shoot if he tries anything." Tom emerged from hiding, gripping his father's rifle with determination. "Yes, sir, I can do it." "Good boy." Liam checked his ammunition and headed back toward the center of town, where gunfire still echoed. He moved carefully from cover to cover, assessing the situation as he went. Near the general store, he found George Walton and several other men engaged in a firefight with one of the remaining outlaws. The man was pinned down behind an overturned wagon, but was still managing to keep them at bay with well-placed shots. Liam circled around through an alley coming up behind the outlaw's position. The man never saw him coming. A quick strike with the butt of Liam's rifle rendered him unconscious, and the defenders quickly moved in to secure him. "3 down," George said grimly. "Where's Shelton?" A final exchange of gunfire from the direction of the bank answered his question. Liam and George ran toward the sound, arriving to find Sheriff Riley crouched behind a water trough, bleeding from a graze to his left arm. "Shelton's in the bank," Riley gasped. "Got past me when my gun jammed." "There's a teller inside." Liam's blood ran cold. A hostage situation complicated matters drastically. "Is there another way in?" "Back door," Riley said, "but he'll be expecting that." "Maybe not if he's distracted," George suggested. "I can create a diversion at the front while you go in the back." Liam shook his head. "Too dangerous. I'll go in alone." "The hell you will," George replied firmly. "That's Harold Jenkins and they've known him since we were boys. I'm not sitting this out." Recognizing the determination in the older man's face, Liam nodded. "All right, but follow my lead." They quickly formulated a plan. George would call out to Shelton from outside, drawing his attention to the front of the bank while Liam slipped in through the back. Riley, despite his wound, insisted on covering the street to ensure none of the wounded gang members rejoined the fight. As George moved into position, Liam circled around to the bank's rear entrance. He waited until he heard George's voice calling out to Shelton, then carefully tested the back door. It was unlocked. Inside, the bank was eerily quiet. Liam moved silently through the back office, his gun ready. He could hear Shelton's response to George, his voice cold and controlled. "I've got your friend here, and I'll kill him if anyone tries to come in. All I want is the money and a horse. Provide those, and he lives." "We need proof Jenkins is alive first," George called back, following the plan perfectly. "Tell them you're alive, old man," Shelton commanded. "I'm here, George," came a shaky voice. "He's got a gun to my head." Liam reached the doorway to the main room, peering carefully around the frame. Shelton stood with his back to the teller's cage, one arm around Jenkins' neck, a revolver pressed to the elderly man's temple. His focus was entirely on the front door, where George's voice was coming from. Taking a deep breath, Liam stepped into the room, his gun aimed squarely at Shelton. "It's over, Shelton. Let him go." The outlaw leader's head whipped around, his eyes widening in surprise before narrowing with cold calculation. "Another step and the old man dies." "Your gang's been captured," Liam said evenly. "There's no way out of this town for you, not alive anyway." Shelton's grip on Jenkins tightened. I've got nothing to lose then, do I? You have your life, Liam replied. For now. A tense silence fell as the two men measured each other. Shelton's eyes were dead, devoid of humanity or compassion. Liam had seen such eyes before on men who killed without remorse or hesitation. Who are you? Shelton asked suddenly. Not a local, too steady with that gun. Does it matter? Curious about the man who's about to die trying to save a stranger. Shelton shifted slightly, angling Jenkins more directly between himself and Liam, because that's what's going to happen. I'm walking out of here, or we're all dying together. Liam kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing, calculating angles and possibilities. He needed to get Jenkins clear before taking his shot. You were military, he said, playing for time. Officer in the Confederate Army, I heard. Something flickered in Shelton's eyes. That was another life. What happened to turn you into this? Liam asked, genuinely curious. What broke you? War broke me, Shelton snarled. Showed me the truth about this world. There's no justice, no fairness. Only power and those too weak to wield it. His grip on Jenkins loosened fractionally as he spoke. I came back to nothing. Everything taken, everyone gone. So I decided to take what I needed, simple as that. And the people you've killed, casualties of their own weakness. Shelton's face twisted with bitter contempt. This world doesn't reward kindness or decency. It crushes them. You're wrong, Liam said quietly, thinking of Nora's unfailing belief in goodness, of George Walton's hard-earned wisdom and acceptance, of a town that had offered him refuge without demanding his past. Some places, some people. They're different. Shelton laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. You actually believe that? Then you're a bigger fool than I thought. As he spoke, Shelton's attention wavered just enough for Jenkins to shift slightly in his grasp. Liam saw his opening and took it. His first shot struck Shelton in the shoulder of his gun arm, causing him to reflexively release Jenkins. The elderly teller dropped to the floor and scrambled away as Shelton, despite his wound, raised his weapon toward Liam. Both men fired simultaneously. Liam felt a burning sensation across his ribs as Shelton's bullet grazed him. His own shot caught Shelton squarely in the chest. The outlaw staggered back, a look of shock on his face, before collapsing to the floor. George burst through the front door, gun drawn, but the fight was already over. Jenkins was shaking but unhurt, and Shelton lay motionless, his dead eyes staring at the ceiling. Liam, are you hit? George asked urgently, noticing the blood seeping through Liam's shirt. Just a graze, Liam replied, though the wound stung fiercely. Jenkins okay? I'm fine, thanks to you, the teller said, his voice trembling with delayed shock. Thought I was a goner for sure. Word spread quickly through Great Bend. The Shelton gang had been defeated, 2 dead, 2 captured alive. The town had survived with remarkably few casualties. Several wounded, including Sheriff Riley and Liam, but no fatalities among the defenders. Dr. Wilson, the town physician, set up a makeshift infirmary in the hotel dining room to treat the injured. Liam sat patiently as the doctor cleaned and bandaged his wound. You're lucky, Dr. Wilson commented. Half an inch to the left and we'd be having a different conversation. Liam nodded, wincing as the doctor applied a stinging antiseptic. How's the sheriff? He'll keep his arm, though he'll be sore for a while. The doctor finished the bandaging and stepped back. You need rest. No riding for at least a week. I'll make sure he follows orders, came a familiar voice from the doorway. Liam looked up to see Nora standing there, her face pale but composed. Behind her stood her mother, Margaret Walton, looking remarkably like an older version of her daughter. Miss Walton, Liam said, suddenly conscious of his half-dressed state. I thought you were at the Hendersons' farm. We were, Margaret answered, moving forward to inspect the doctor's work with a critical eye. Until a very determined young man on horseback arrived to tell us the danger was past. Tom, Liam guessed, remembering the stable boy's eager face. Yes, Nora confirmed. He said you were hurt. She approached cautiously, her eyes fixed on the bandage wrapping his torso. How bad is it? Just a scratch, he assured her. I've had worse. Dr. Wilson snorted. A scratch that needed 12 stitches. Typical. He gathered his supplies. Keep it clean. Change the bandage daily and come see me if there's any sign of infection. And rest. He emphasized the last word with a stern look before leaving to attend his other patients. Margaret Walton patted Liam's hand. I'll go check on the sheriff. Nora, don't tire him out. With a knowing smile, she followed the doctor out, closing the door behind her. Alone with Nora, Liam felt suddenly vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with his physical injury. She moved closer, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Pa told me what you did. How you saved Mr. Jenkins and stopped Shelton. Her voice was thick with emotion. He says you're a hero. Liam shook his head. I just did what needed doing. Your father was just as brave. That sounds like something he would say. A small smile curved her lips. He also said something else. That you risked your life to protect this town, our town, even though you're just passing through. The phrase "just passing through" hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken questions. Liam struggled to find the right words, to express the confusion of emotions swirling within him. Nora, are you still leaving? She interrupted, her direct gaze challenging him to be equally honest. I've always moved on, he said slowly. It's been safer that way. Safer for whom? For everyone. He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of hard living. I told you before, my past isn't something I'm proud of. And I told you that everyone has a story, she countered, moving to sit beside him on the examination table. Liam, whatever you've done, whoever you were, it's not who you are now. I've seen the real you these past weeks. Have you? He asked, vulnerability evident in his voice. Because sometimes I'm not sure I know who that is anymore. Nora reached for his hand, her touch gentle but insistent. Then stay long enough to find out. Stay and see what you could be here in Great Bend, with people who care about you. She hesitated, then added softly, with me. Liam's heart raced at her words, at the naked hope in her eyes. For so long he'd convinced himself that he didn't deserve happiness, that the darkness of his past had permanently stained his future. But here was this remarkable woman, offering him a chance at redemption, at belonging. I'm afraid, he admitted, the words torn from some deep place inside him. Afraid of bringing my ghosts to your doorstep, afraid of failing you, of not being the man you think I am. I'm not asking for guarantees, Nora said, squeezing his hand. Just a chance. Stay through the winter. Help Pa with the store. He's not getting any younger and the heavy work is hard on him. If spring comes and you still want to leave. Her voice faltered slightly. Then at least you'll know you tried. Liam looked into her eyes, seeing the strength there, the unwavering belief in him that he hadn't earned but desperately wanted to. In that moment, the prospect of riding away from Great Bend from her seemed more painful than any bullet wound. Through the winter, he agreed softly. But Nora, I need you to understand something. There are parts of my life I've never shared with anyone. Things I've done, things I've seen. They're not easy to speak of. I'm not asking you to tell me everything at once, she replied. Just don't shut me out completely. The rest will come with time. He nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders even as another, more hopeful burden settled there, the responsibility of her trust, her affection. It terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Their conversation was interrupted by George Walton, who entered with a tray of food. Margaret insisted you needed to eat, he explained, setting the tray beside Liam. He glanced between his daughter and Liam, noting their joined hands with a raised eyebrow. Should I be concerned about what I've interrupted? Nora straightened, her cheeks flushing, but she didn't release Liam's hand. I've asked Mr. Irwin to stay through the winter, to help at the store. George's expression revealed nothing. And has Mr. Irwin agreed to this arrangement? Yes, sir, Liam replied, meeting the older man's gaze directly. If you're amenable. A long moment passed as George studied him. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Well, that's convenient because I was about to offer you a job myself. Seems great minds think alike. He glanced at his daughter with affectionate exasperation. Though some move more quickly than others. Pa, Nora protested, blushing deeper. George held up a placating hand. No need to explain. I've seen how you two look at each other. He turned his attention back to Liam. There's a room above the store that's just being used for storage. Could be converted to living quarters if you're interested. Would save you hotel expenses. The offer took Liam by surprise. That's very generous. It's practical, George corrected, though his eyes twinkled. Can't have my new employee living across town, especially with winter coming. Besides, he added more seriously, after today, you've earned a place here, if you want it. The invitation went beyond employment or housing. It was an acceptance, an inclusion in the life of the town and the Walton family. Liam felt a tightness in his throat that made speaking difficult. I'd like that, he managed finally. Thank you, George nodded, satisfied. Good. Now eat your food before Margaret comes to check, or we'll all be in trouble. He squeezed Nora's shoulder affectionately and left them alone again. Your father is a remarkable man, Liam said after a moment. He likes you, Nora replied, smiling, and that's not easy to earn. She stood, straightening her skirt. I should let you rest, doctor's orders. As she turned to leave, Liam caught her hand. Nora. She looked back at him, and he found himself momentarily lost in her gaze. Thank you for believing there was something in me worth saving. Her expression softened with tenderness. Oh, Liam, there's so much in you worth saving. I'm just grateful I get the chance to show you. With a gentle squeeze of his hand, she left him to his meal and his thoughts, which for the first time in years were turned toward the future rather than the past. The weeks that followed were a time of healing and adjustment. Liam's wound mended quickly under the combined care of Dr. Wilson and Margaret Walton, whose herbal poultices proved remarkably effective at preventing infection. As soon as he was able, Liam began working at the general store, learning the inventory and helping George with the heavy lifting that had become increasingly difficult for the older man. The room above the store was larger than Liam had expected, with 2 windows that offered views of both the main street and the small garden behind the Waltons' living quarters. With Nora's help, he transformed it from a cluttered storage space into a comfortable lodging. She insisted on adding homey touches: curtains for the windows, a colorful quilt for the bed, even a small bookshelf stocked with volumes she thought he might enjoy. You don't have to do all this, he protested one afternoon as she arranged wildflowers in a simple vase on his small table. I know, she replied with a smile, but I want to. Everyone deserves a place that feels like home. Home. The word resonated with Liam in a way it hadn't for years. As a child, home had been his father's store in Colorado with its familiar smells of leather, coffee, and wood smoke. As a young man, it had been wherever he hung his hat between jobs. And after the darkness that had driven him to a life of wandering, it had been nowhere at all. Yet now, in this small Kansas town, he was beginning to remember what home felt like. It was the routine of opening the store each morning with George, the satisfaction of organizing shelves and helping customers, The quiet evening spent reading by lamplight or sitting on the Waltons' porch, listening to Margaret's stories of early settler days while Nora mended clothing or worked on her ledgers. And increasingly, home was defined by Nora herself, her smile when he entered a room, her laugh at his rare attempts at humor, her unwavering belief in his goodness despite knowing so little of his past. As autumn deepened toward winter, their relationship evolved cautiously. George maintained a watchful eye, but he seemed satisfied with Liam's respectful behavior and work ethic. They had begun taking Sunday afternoon walks together, chaperoned at first by Margaret, but eventually allowed the privacy of walking alone, though always in full view of the town. During these walks, Liam gradually shared pieces of his past carefully at first, then with increasing openness as Nora's acceptance never wavered. "My father owned a store like your father's," he told her one crisp November afternoon as they strolled along the riverbank. "In a small town in Colorado Territory. He was a good man, honest to a fault, taught me the value of hard work and fair dealing." "Is that where you learned the store business?" Nora asked, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. "Yes. I worked with him from the time I was 12 until I was 18. Liam's voice grew distant with memory. "He wanted me to take over someday, have a stable life in one place." "What happened?" Liam was silent for a long moment, watching the river's current swirl around half-submerged rocks. "The war came. I enlisted like most young men. By the time I returned 3 years later, everything had changed." Nora waited patiently for him to continue, her presence steady and reassuring. "The town had been raided several times in my absence. My father was killed defending the store during the last raid, just a month before I made it home." The pain, dulled by years but never fully healed, colored his voice. "I buried him and sold what was left of the business. Couldn't bear to stay there without him." "I'm so sorry, Liam," Nora said softly, squeezing his arm. "He sounds like he was a wonderful father." "He was." Liam's throat tightened with emotion. "He would have liked you, said I needed someone with sense to balance my recklessness." She smiled at that. "And were you reckless?" "Very," he admitted. "Always chasing excitement, never content with the quiet life he valued." Regret shadowed his features. "I wish I'd appreciated it more when I had the chance." They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the river's flow and the rustle of fallen leaves beneath their feet. "What did you do after you left Colorado?" Nora finally asked. Liam hesitated, approaching the darker part of his story. "I drifted for a while. Then I took a job as a deputy in a mining town. That's where I earned this." He touched the scar on his cheek. "And where I learned that wearing a badge doesn't always mean upholding justice." "What do you mean?" "The sheriff I worked for was corrupt. Took money from claim jumpers, let the powerful break laws that would send ordinary men to jail." His jaw tightened at the memory. "When I confronted him, things turned ugly. There was a fight. He pulled his gun, I pulled mine, I was faster." Nora's steps faltered slightly, but she didn't pull away. "You killed him?" "Yes." Liam stared straight ahead, waiting for her reaction, for the revulsion or fear he expected. Instead, she asked quietly, "Was there a trial of sorts?" The town was divided. Some knew what kind of man he'd been. Others only saw a deputy who'd shot his sheriff. "In the end, they couldn't prove I'd done anything wrong legally, but I wasn't welcome anymore." He shook his head. "After that, I decided it was easier to keep moving, not get involved. Until Great Bend." "Until me," Nora said softly, looking up at him with eyes that held no judgment, only understanding. "Until you," he agreed, marveling at her acceptance. "You saw something in me I thought was long gone." "It was never gone, Liam, just buried." She stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "You're a good man who's faced difficult choices. That doesn't make you unworthy of happiness." In that moment, with the late autumn sun gilding her hair and her gaze steady on his, Liam felt the last of his resistance crumbling. He had spent so long believing himself damaged beyond repair, deserving only solitude and penance. Yet here was this remarkable woman, seeing through his carefully constructed walls to the heart of him and finding it worthy of love. "Nora," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I don't know what I did to deserve finding you, but I thank God every day that I rode into Great Bend." Her smile was radiant. "Perhaps you were always meant to come here. Perhaps we were always meant to find each other." Liam had never been a man who believed in fate or divine intervention, but looking at Nora, he could almost believe that some higher power had guided him to this place, this moment, this woman. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and brief, a question as much as an expression of feeling. When he pulled back, her eyes were shining, her smile so bright it seemed to illuminate him from within. "I've been waiting for you to do that," she confessed, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Worth the wait?" he asked, his own smile more open than it had been in years. "Definitely." She glanced around, suddenly aware of their public location. "Though perhaps we should continue our walk before someone reports to Pa that I'm being thoroughly compromised in broad daylight." Liam laughed, offering his arm once more. "We can't have that. I'm just beginning to convince him I'm not a complete scoundrel." As they resumed their stroll, Liam felt lighter than he had in memory, as if a burden he'd carried for so long had finally been set down. There were still parts of his past he hadn't shared, demons he hadn't fully exorcised, but for the first time, he believed he might someday be free of them. Winter settled over Great Bend with a series of heavy snowfalls that transformed the town into a wonderland of white. Business at the store slowed as travel became difficult, but the locals still came regularly for supplies and, increasingly, for the pleasure of conversation with the Waltons and their new employee. Liam found himself becoming a part of the community in ways he'd never expected. He joined the volunteer fire brigade, taught a few of the local boys some basic self-defense techniques, and even reluctantly agreed to play Joseph in the church's Christmas pageant after the original actor fell ill. "I can't believe you talked me into this," he muttered to Nora as she helped him adjust the makeshift costume before the performance. "You'll be wonderful," she assured him, smoothing the robe over his shoulders. "You only have to stand there looking stoic and protective. You do that naturally." "I don't know a single line of scripture," he protested. "You don't have any lines," she reminded him, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Just stand beside Mary, look adoringly at the baby Jesus, and try not to scowl at the shepherds." Despite his discomfort, Liam found himself enjoying the pageant. The children's enthusiasm was infectious, and the community's appreciation genuine. Afterward, during the church social, he received numerous compliments on his dignified portrayal and protective demeanor. "You've become quite popular," George observed as they stood near the refreshment table, watching Nora chat with a group of women across the room. "Seems half the town has forgotten you've only been here a few months." "Thanks to you and your family," Liam replied. "People trust your judgment." George nodded thoughtfully. "It's more than that, though. You've made your own place here, proven yourself with actions, not just words." He sipped his cider, then added casually, "Sheriff Riley mentioned he might be looking for a deputy come spring. Says his arm's not what it used to be since the shooting." Liam's surprise must have shown on his face because George continued, "He hasn't approached you yet because he wasn't sure you'd be staying past winter. Your arrangement with us was only until spring, after all." The reminder of their original agreement stirred a complex mix of emotions in Liam. The months in Great Bend had changed him. healed something broken inside him. The thought of leaving, of returning to his solitary existence on the trail, no longer held any appeal. "I hadn't given much thought to moving on," he admitted. "Not lately." A knowing smile crossed George's face. "I suspected as much, particularly given your obvious feelings for my daughter." Liam tensed slightly, uncertain of the older man's reaction to this acknowledgement. "Relax," George said, clapping him on the shoulder. "If I disapproved, you'd have known months ago. Nora's happiness means everything to Margaret and me, and anyone with eyes can see you make her happy." Relief washed over Liam. "She makes me happy too, sir. Happier than I ever thought possible." "Good. Then perhaps it's time we discussed your intentions." George's tone remained friendly, but there was a seriousness beneath it that commanded attention. "Winter will be over before we know it, and decisions will need to be made." Liam nodded, understanding the implicit question. "I'd like to stay in Great Bend permanently, if that's all right. And I'd like your permission to court Nora properly. With the hope that, if she'll have me, we might eventually marry." The words felt momentous as they left his lips, a formal declaration of the future he'd begun to envision, a future that once would have seemed impossible but now felt right in a bone-deep way. George studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You have my permission and my blessing." "But," he added, his expression growing stern, "you'll court her properly. No rushing. She deserves a proper engagement, and Margaret would never forgive either of us if she didn't get to plan a proper wedding." "Yes, sir," Liam agreed, unable to suppress a smile at the older man's protective instincts warring with his obvious approval. "And you'll need more suitable lodgings than that room above the store if you're to start a family," George continued practically. "The old Peterson place at the edge of town is for sale. Needs work, but it's a solid house with good land." Liam blinked at George's matter-of-fact planning of his future. "You've given this some thought." "Margaret and I have discussed it," George admitted. "We're not getting any younger, and we want to see Nora settled with a good man. You've proven yourself to be that man, despite your unconventional arrival in our lives." Across the room, as if sensing their discussion, Nora glanced over at them. Her smile, warm and inquiring, sent a wave of certainty through Liam. This was where he belonged. With her, in this town, among these people who had taught him that kindness wasn't weakness, that community wasn't a trap, that love wasn't a luxury he didn't deserve. "Thank you," he said simply to George, "for everything." The older man nodded, understanding all that Liam couldn't quite express. "You're family now, Liam, or you will be soon enough, family." The word echoed in Liam's mind throughout the evening, filling him with a sense of belonging he'd thought forever lost to him. That night, as he walked Nora home through the snow-covered streets after seeing the last of the church social attendees off, Liam felt a profound peace settle over him. The cold air was crisp, the stars brilliant overhead, and beside him walked the woman who had changed his life with her unwavering belief in his goodness. "You're quiet tonight," Nora observed as they approached her home. "Just thinking," he replied, squeezing her gloved hand. "About what?" "About how different my life is now from what it was when I rode into Great Bend, about how much I've changed." He stopped walking, turning to face her under the glow of a street lamp. "About you, and how you saw something worth saving in a man who'd forgotten what it meant to belong anywhere." Nora's expression softened with affection. "You saved yourself, Liam. I just helped you remember who you really were beneath all those layers of pain and isolation." "No," he insisted gently. "You did more than that. You showed me that the world I thought I knew harsh, unforgiving, devoid of genuine kindness wasn't the only world possible. You created a different reality for me, just by being exactly who you are." She smiled, her eyes bright with emotion. That's quite a responsibility to place on a simple storekeeper's daughter. There's nothing simple about you, Nora Walton. He reached up to brush a snowflake from her cheek. I spoke with your father tonight, asked his permission to court you properly. Her breath caught. And what did he say? He gave his blessing. Also suggested I look into buying the old Peterson place, since apparently we're going to need room for a family. Liam's lips quirked in amusement at the memory. Did he now? Nora laughed softly. Pa never was one for subtlety. I'm not either, Liam said, his expression growing serious. Nora, I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day in the store when you gave cookies to a stranger who'd done nothing to earn your kindness. Her eyes widened at the declaration, though it couldn't have been entirely unexpected given the direction of their relationship. I know it's too soon to propose properly, he continued. Your father would have my hide if I rushed you, but I want you to know that's where my heart is headed. Where I hope we're both headed when the time is right. Nora's smile was radiant as she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the scar on his cheek with tender familiarity. I love you too, Liam Irwin. And yes, that's exactly where we're headed. The kiss they shared beneath the falling snow was a promise of a future together, of healing old wounds, of building something new and beautiful from the broken pieces of the past. Spring came to Great Bend in a riot of wildflowers and fresh green. The town awakened from its winter slumber. Farms bustled with planting activity, and the general store grew busy once more with travelers and locals alike. Liam had settled into his role as George's right-hand man, learning the business thoroughly with an eye toward eventually taking over more responsibilities, as the older man contemplated retirement. He had also accepted Sheriff Riley's offer to become a part-time deputy, helping maintain law and order in the growing town while continuing his work at the store. And, true to George's suggestion, he had purchased the Peterson place, a sturdy two-story house on the edge of town, with enough land for a garden and perhaps a few animals. He'd spent his free time through the latter part of winter making repairs and improvements, often with help from townsmen who had come to consider him a friend. On a particularly fine April morning, Liam stood on the porch of his new home, surveying the results of his labor. The house gleamed with fresh paint, the yard was neatly fenced, and Margaret Walton's generous donation of cuttings from her garden had resulted in flower beds that promised summer beauty. It looks wonderful, Nora said, joining him on the porch. She'd ridden out with her father, who was now inspecting Liam's handiwork on the barn roof. I can hardly believe it's the same place. Still needs furniture, Liam noted, and curtains, and whatever else makes a house feel lived in. That will come with time. She slipped her hand into his, a gesture that had become natural between them. It's a perfect home, Liam, for a family. He turned to her, taking in her radiant expression, the hope and love shining in her eyes. In that moment, he knew it was time. The house was ready, their courtship had progressed with proper respect for tradition, and his heart was more certain than it had ever been about anything. Nora, he began, then hesitated, suddenly nervous despite their many conversations about a shared future. I had a whole speech planned. Was going to take you to the river where we first kissed, make it properly romantic. She smiled, squeezing his hand encouragingly. This is perfect, here in the home you've built with your own hands. Drawing strength from her steady gaze, Liam took both her hands in his and knelt on the porch boards. Nora Walton, you found me when I was lost, loved me when I'd forgotten how to love myself, and showed me that kindness isn't just a pretty illusion but the most powerful force in the world. His voice grew husky with emotion. You've made me a better man than I ever thought I could be. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears of happiness filled her eyes. Yes, she whispered, then more loudly, "Yes, Liam Irwin, I will marry you." He rose and gathered her into his arms, his heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. As they embraced, George approached from the barn, satisfaction evident in his expression. "I take it she said yes," he called, a knowing smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "She did," Liam confirmed, his arm around Nora's waist. George nodded as if everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. "Your mother will be pleased, Nora. She's been planning your wedding since Christmas." He clapped Liam on the shoulder. "Welcome to the family, son, officially." "Thank you, sir," Liam replied, the word family still resonating within him like the peal of a perfect bell. The wedding took place in June, when the prairie was alive with color and the weather mild enough for an outdoor celebration. The entire town turned out for the event, held in the churchyard where Liam had first agreed to attend the social that had begun his integration into Great Bend. As Nora walked toward him on her father's arm, radiant in a gown of ivory silk that Margaret had preserved from her own wedding day, Liam felt a sense of wonder that his life had led him here, to this moment. Behind him stood Sheriff Riley as his best man, a testament to the unexpected friendship that had developed between them. Around him were the faces of people who had become more than neighbors. They were community. They were friends. They were the foundation of his new life. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Liam's voice didn't waver as he spoke his vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish Nora for all the days of his life. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the assembled townspeople seemed to affirm not just their union, but Liam's complete acceptance into the heart of Great Bend. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food and music and dancing under lantern light. As the night deepened and stars appeared overhead, Liam found a moment of quiet with his new wife, standing slightly apart from the festivities. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Though I'm looking forward to going home, our home." The words sent a thrill through him. Their home, their life together beginning tonight. "Mrs. Irwin," he said, testing the sound of her new name, "has a nice ring to it." She smiled up at him. "It does, doesn't it? Though I suspect some people will always call me Miss Walton out of habit. As long as you always come home to me, they can call you whatever they like." Her expression grew tender. "Always, Liam. No matter what comes, we face it together now." As they rejoined the celebration for the final dances of the evening, Liam looked around at the faces of those who had gathered to share their joy. From Sheriff Riley to Tom from the livery, from Mrs. Parker with her lace curtains to Dr. Wilson who had stitched his wounds. Each had played a part in the transformation of a lonely drifter into a man with roots, purpose, and love. And at the center of it all was Nora, his wife, the woman who had seen beyond his scars and defenses to the heart of him, and loved what she found there until he learned to love it too. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of their home, truly theirs now, with Nora's touches already softening its newness, Liam pulled her close under the starlit sky. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" she asked, her arms encircling his waist. "For loving me until I remembered how to be kind, how to trust, how to believe in goodness again." He tilted her face up to his. "You saved me, Nora Irwin, in every way a person can be saved." Her smile, luminous in the moonlight, was his answer. And as he carried her across the threshold into their shared future, Liam knew with absolute certainty that the man who had ridden into Great Bend hardened by life, skeptical of kindness, afraid of connection, was gone forever. In his place stood a man transformed by love, ready to build a life rich with the very things he'd once denied himself. A man, finally, truly home,